Hello my beautiful watchers, and welcome to Lost in Adaptation, the show about comparing media to its source material. By popular demand, we're returning to the land of Bridgerton to discuss the second season of Netflix's interpretation of the novel series by Julia Quinn, specifically Book 2, The Viscount Who Loved Me. Quick heads up, to avoid echoing what I've already said, I've written this review under the assumption that you've already seen my episode about Season 1, wherein I described the history of the author, the backstory around the show's creation, explain why I spent weeks reading every book in the Bridgerton series in preparation for this, why that was torture for me, and why it ultimately is not important if I, a cis-straight male, like them or not. So yeah, if you've not seen it yet, there's the thing. Right, Bridgerton Season 2 hit Netflix on March 25th, 2022, and despite its audience having a lot more freedom to leave the house this time around, was as well received as its predecessor. Indeed, apparently many consider it to be the superior season, claiming the show had successfully refined its format and improved on its sense of humour. Once again, a joint Netflix and Shondaland production, Chris Van Dusen returned as showrunner and continued to be heavily involved in the writing process. Almost all of the Season 1 cast reprised their roles, the notable exception being Regé Jean Page, which is fine. It's fine. It's fine that he's gone. It's fine. He decided he'd rather be a paladin in the D&D movie, and Lord help me, I can't fault him for that. It's not his story anymore anyway. Book 2 in the series was Anthony's love life, so Jonathan Bailey got promoted from supporting character to lead, and Simone Ashley, Charitha Chandaran, and Shelley Conn joined the cast as his love interests and their mother. Now, some amongst you might have thought that you could predict how this episode of Lost in Adaptation was going to play out based on my review of Season 1. Aha, you thought to yourself, I understand the formula now. Dom said that all of the books are hyper-focused on the romantic lead, so anything directly involving Anthony and Kate will be book accurate, and everything else will be original writing. Well, as it happens, no. I'm afraid that you have assumed too much and made a fool of yourself, but that's okay, because I love you. That is indeed the format, but only for the first 3 episodes, after which, judging by how much the show has in common with the book, one can only assume that Mr. Van Dusen loaded his copy into a specially built trebuchet and launched it into the stratosphere. There was the occasional nod to events from the book, but for the most part, Season 2 became a story entirely of Shondaland's making. I'm actually kind of impressed because the last book-accurate plot point was foreshadowed multiple times throughout Season 1. That's right, Chekhov's bee returned to fulfill its destiny and evolved into the Divergence Bee, whose stinger penetrating the heaving bosom of the female lead represents the exact moment the show raised a middle finger to Quinn's writing. So once again, I'm forced to sub-categorize my show to accommodate the bloody Bridgertons. This time we're going to do which parts of the book they did choose to transcribe, if there were any major changes to those parts, a post-B plot comparison, then I'll try to break down the many B plots and how they tie into later novels. Let's talk adaptation. Having fucked his way through every opera singer, sex worker, and scullery maid in London, Viscount Anthony Bridgerton decides it's finally time to take his duty to produce an heir to his noble title seriously, and vows to marry. As he's not interested in a love match, he almost arbitrarily chooses a young girl named Edwina, as she is currently considered the most desirable woman of the matchmaking season, a position sometimes referred to as the Diamond. However, his intentions are almost immediately hindered, because Edwina will only marry someone who's earned the approval of her elder half-sister Kate, who is painfully aware of Anthony's man-whore reputation. Anthony's attempts to get to know Edwina continuously add to the mutual vexation between himself and Kate, and he certainly doesn't do himself any favours by talking about how crappy a husband he intends to be to his friends where Kate can overhear him. Kate and Anthony continue to drive each other up the wall and treat each other rather poorly, which, as we all know in the romance genre, means they 100% want to bang. Against her better judgment, Kate's family accepts an invitation to visit the Bridgerton ancestral country estate, where the younger generation partake in a game of Pall Mall, a precursor to croquet, played with the Bridgerton rules, which pretty much boil down to it's more important to good-naturedly screw over one's opponent than actually attempt to win. Kate selects the black mallet of death, leaving Anthony to struggle with his masculinity while using the pink. The next day, while Anthony and Kate are walking through the gardens together and discussing his courtship of Edwina, Kate is stung on the chest by a bee, which triggers Anthony into a full-blown panic attack because his father had unexpectedly and violently died of an extreme allergic reaction to a bee sting in his youth. And here, as mentioned, Netflix Bridgerton chooses to forge its own path. Some post-B callbacks to the book include Kate not being a fan of thunderstorms, though I'll need to revisit that a bit later, Kate getting injured in a horse-related accident, and Anthony ending up getting soaked in a pond because of Kate's pet corgi Newton. General book accuracies include Anthony, despite his decade-spanning attempt to prove himself a bigger slut than Barney Stinson, being extremely dedicated to his role as Viscount, managing the family's finances and many estates across the country, and poor Penelope Featherington looking terrible in the colour yellow, yet being forced to dress in it by her mother. It's worth noting that in a series that's famous for its pretty chaotic casting practices, Jonathan Bailey actually matches the attractive, chestnut-haired, brown-eyed Anthony pretty damn well. I cannot imagine how they could possibly have done it, but I find myself wishing they could have found a way to ditch the enemies to lovers arc like they did so many other things. Beautiful watchers who have followed my channel for a while will know it's my personal least favourite romantic trope, simply because of oversaturation. These days it actually feels weird when I see a couple hit it off from the start instead of hating each other. But I digress. So again, specifically regarding the stuff that was in some way based on the book, this is what they changed. Please forgive me for demanding you watch my last episode, then repeating myself, but I feel it must be reiterated that Queen Charlotte never featured in the original Bridgerton book series. She only appears in the novelization of the Queen Charlotte spin-off series that was co-written by Quinn and Shonda Rhimes. Anything you see Her Majesty doing on Netflix was a creation of Netflix. For example, the Seasons Diamond seems to have been upgraded from a slang term for the most popular girl of marriageable age to an official title bestowed by the Queen. Once again, the ethnicity of several major characters is changed, and once again, I am not convinced the writers thought through all the implications of it. Kate and Edwina Sheffield become Kate and Edwina Sharma, descended on their mother's side from a British noble family, but born and raised in India. Don't get me wrong, it is great to see the largest immigrant population of the UK represented like this, but in 1814, India was being ravished by an oppressive and highly exploitative British occupation that had been ruining their economy, suppressing their culture, starving their poor to death, and violently suppressing all rebellion for over a century. By this point in history, the royal family's role in British politics was largely symbolic, but it's still a bit weird seeing proud Indian women chilling with the Queen, who's at least overseeing the brutal rape of their country. You'd think, it might come up. One of the girls might say, "Hey, Your Majesty, could you not? Because it kinda sucks. Maybe you could just not anymore?" The show blatantly avoids several other opportunities to make race a direct part of the plot. Par example are, they added in a plot involving some arsehole prejudiced grandparents who were estranged from their daughter for most of her life because they didn't approve of her marriage, and are now trying to manipulate her children into marrying someone they consider acceptable by withholding their inheritance. Okay, so, old white British aristocrats are horrified by their daughter's interracial marriage. That makes perfect sense. But actually no. It's the evil-minded grandparents that are in the interracial marriage. The show cast Shobhazu Kapoor in the role of Lady Sheffield alongside Anthony Head as her husband. Hi Giles. This in of itself brings up some interesting timing issues because the age of the actors suggests that their marriage would have predated Queen Charlotte and King George's union magically ending racism. But yeah, their objection to their daughter's late husband wasn't racially motivated at all. It was simply that he was working class.
And all for what? A mere clerk, was he?
So yeah, I guess Lord and Lady Sheffield were ahead of their time radical liberals when it came to racial equality, but classist conservatives. Do you see what I mean? Van Dusen publicly rejected the concept of a colorblind casting and boasted of how he had made race a key part of his show, but continues to do everything he can to skirt around the subject like he's allergic to it, even at the cost of creating weird plot holes. I maintain that overall, it is a net gain to the universe in general that the makers of Bridgerton have chosen not to cast their show as exclusively white as real-life history or the books it's based on would demand, but there is room for improvement in how they're going about it. Lady Danbury, a consistent but still pretty minor character in the novels, has her role upgraded again. She originally just popped up during social events to sass people in general and not give a shit about who she offends because she's got old privilege. She's more involved in the A-plot than ever before now as the Sharma family's friend, host, and general benefactor, using her personal friendship with the Queen and social social connections to advance their cause and suffering the same backlash as them as the plot develops. They added a mounted meet-cute between Anthony and Kate that was later called back to when she fell off and injured herself towards the end. Kate's astrophobia is very toned down in the show. Originally, Anthony found her in a catatonic state hiding under a desk in the library and had to sit with her for several minutes before she could even move or acknowledge his presence. It's revealed later in the book that she had a repressed childhood memory of her birth mother dying of a painful sickness during a storm. On the subject of toned down, while Kate overhearing Anthony making a dang fool of himself regarding what kind of husband he's planning to be is book accurate, exactly what he said is... Well, in the show, he merely states that he plans to treat his marriage like a business arrangement as opposed to anything to do with love, which he not inaccurately points out to Kate later is a pretty normal thing for the time. In the book, well...
Oh, my Viscount, I would have loved to be your mistress again, but I'm looking for something long-term, and I hear you're gonna get married soon.
Ha! That would only be an issue if I intended to be faithful to my wife, and I do not. I am going to cheat on her all the time. Cheat, 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 all day long, because I will not love her. Aye! Yes, that really happened. Which brings me to the main reason that I personally enjoyed the show a lot more than the novel. No matter how arrogant, smug, condescending, or unnecessarily angry Anthony was on screen, he pales in comparison to what an unbelievable prick his written forebear was. The enemies to lovers trope requires the leads to not get along at first, but the way that book Anthony treats Kate is just genuinely horrible. What really got to me was his egotistical certainty that no matter how awful a person Kate knew him to be, he could still take her little sister away from her anytime he chose. Not only that, he rubs this in her face to establish dominance over her. His grasp tightened on her arm. Before I return you to the sanctuary of the chaperones and spinsters, there's one thing we need to make clear. Kate held her breath. She did not like the hard tone in his voice. I am going to court your sister, and should I decide that she will make a suitable Lady Bridgerton, I will make her my wife. Kate whipped her head up to face him, fire flashing in her eyes. And I suppose, then, that you think it's your place to decide Edwina's fate. Do not forget, my lord, even if you decide she will make a suitable, she sneered the word, Lady Bridgerton, she might choose otherwise. He looked down on her with the confidence of a male who is never crossed. Should I decide to ask Edwina, she will not say no. Are you telling me that no woman has ever been able to resist you? He did not answer, just raised one supercilious brow and let her draw her own conclusions. I don't know about you, but I do not understand how I'm supposed to root for the motherfucker boasting that he's so damn handsome and charming any woman on earth is his for the taking. And while it's not unusual for the time, it really doesn't help that he's a 30-year-old man and Edwina is only 17. It gives a serious sexual predator overtone to the whole thing. Other highlights of Book Anthony being the biggest douchebag of the 19th century include, but are not limited to:
This marriage has happened so fast, I'm very nervous about losing my virginity. Can we hold off on the wedding night for a week or two so I can be emotionally and mentally ready for it?
No, I don't want to wait that long.
Newton, shake! Ugh! I'll kill you!
Yes, that also really happened. It would have been a hell of a lot better if this behavior is what he had to overcome as his personal character arc, but he's just as much of a smug, oversexed, misogynistic prick at the end of the book. The only difference is he's a smug, oversexed, misogynistic prick with a slightly better handle on his daddy issues. He has moments of kindness, like coming to Penelope's aid against her bully and the compassion he showed Kate during her thunderstorm panic attack, and I get the impression that Quinn expected these acts of kindness scattered in amongst his obscene behavior to redeem the character in my eyes and represent the real Anthony showing through. But like, any reader of the book knows what Anthony's like inside. His internal monologue is just a constant stream of holier-than-thou bullshit and self-pity. And I hate to go all Batman Begins on this, but even if he was a decent person deep down, that doesn't mean shit if 99% of the time he acts like an alpha male wannabe fuckboy. Show Anthony isn't a saint, but you get the impression he's trying in a way that just wasn't present before. He tries to earn Kate's approval instead of arrogantly dismissing it like in the book, which acknowledges that he respects that their bond as sisters might be more powerful powerful than his good looks. He even attempts to read them poetry that he plagiarized from Benedict and admits the inauthenticity of this. I hope I'm not assuming too much when I observe that one of the things that makes Show Anthony so damn sexy to women is, in a world full of men perpetually unwilling or unable to express their feelings, he's unable to not voice how humble and helpless he's made by his searing passion for Kate.
Do you think that there is a corner of this earth that you could travel to far away enough to free me from this torment? You are the bane of my existence and the object of all my desires.
The book version of him is never forced to display the same emotional vulnerability. He's overcome with his need to bang Kate right before he does, but it takes a fucking carriage accident to get him to even tell her that he loves her. Anyways, moving on. Simon and his stupid perfect face were supposed to take part in the Pall Mall game, but it really is fine. No one wanted him there anyway. I don't care. I'm not even... Shut up! The dog-related Viscount soaking took place much earlier in the story and involved Anthony having to chase the infernal hound across the park in an eventually fruitless attempt to stop him from jumping on Edwina and knocking her into the water, forcing her suitor to jump in after her to pull her out. Of course, the really important part was seeing Mr. Bailey in a wet white shirt, so he could continue Colin Firth's legacy, so all good there. Newton's reign of terror continues throughout the novel and was one of the inciting factors in a near-fatal accident towards the end. So I think the real lesson of the story is corgis, not even once. Humor is of course subjective, but I personally think the show is a lot funnier than the books. Honestly, I'm half convinced that what few funny moments there were in the novels weren't necessarily intentional on the part of the author, but the show continuously demonstrates a genuine wit that really adds to the enjoyment. Oh, and not for nothing, but that's actually the wrong kind of bee. Honeybees were the murderous little buggers in the book, but the show went with the much more visually recognizable Bumble. Speaking of, I guess it's time to discuss the post-bee divergency. I know most of you have seen it already, but just as a reminder, after Kate gets stung, the show starts down the path of the tried and tested romantic trope, the love triangle. In the aftermath of Anthony's panic attack, he and Kate let their guards down for a moment and nearly smooch before getting interrupted. The next day, Kate defies gender norms and comes on a hunt with him, sensually touching his rifle during a moment alone before getting interrupted. Later that day, Anthony verbalizes his feelings for the first time and they almost smooch again, but are interrupted again. Can a toff get a moment alone? Damn! Satisfyingly, Daphne calls Anthony out on how fucked up it is to court Edwina while clearly wanting Kate, and throws in a reminder of the hypocrisy of him demanding that she wed Simon when he caught her in basically the same situation last season. Being demonstrously in the wrong about something clearly gets Anthony's hackles up, and the next day he deals with his emotional turmoil in the absolute worst possible way, and impulsively proposes to Edwina. The newly intendeds are invited to hang out with the Queen for some reason, who decides to host their wedding. There's then an episode or two of them getting ready for marriage while Anthony and Kate are thrown into one intimate situation after another and constantly fuck each other. Edwina's grandparents come for a visit and are condescending and passive-aggressive about their daughter Mary's life choices and spill the beans to Edwina that her sister and mother had been hiding from her that she was going to be written out of their will if she didn't marry someone they approve of, i.e. a British gentleman. Anthony calls them out for being shitty grandparents and throws them out of his house, earning big hero points with Edwina, and while attempting to apologize for the deception, Kate learns that her sister is really in love with him. Anthony attempts to use this drama as a way to back out of his poor decision-making, but Kate talks him into sticking with it for Edwina's sake. However, literally at the altar, Edwina finally smacks her head into the sexual tension crackling between her intended and her sister and calls everything off herself, plunging both families into a scandal that makes them social pariahs. They try to work together to claw their way back into the game, but their efforts are ruined by a poorly timed whistle-down hit piece on Eloise that I'll talk more about later. Anthony and Kate finally give in to their desire and do it in the gazebo. That is not an innuendo for a weird kink, they are literally under a gazebo. The next day, Kate goes for a ride in the rain to clear her head and is injured falling from her horse and ends up in a coma for a few days, which, while obviously stressful for all involved, does incline Edwina to forgive her for ruining her marriage. After Kate recovers, her sister encourages her to follow her heart, and Queen Charlotte decides to throw her royal power around to force an end to the scandal, and suggests that they could tie up loose ends by setting the leftover third wheels from both seasons up with each other.
Have I yet told you about my nephew? He is a prince. And he is available.
Cut to some time later, Anthony and Kate are happily married, The end. So, would it surprise you, my beautiful watchers, if I told you that love triangles played zero part in the original storyline? In the book, Anthony never got the chance to get engaged to Edwina because his original reaction to the bee sting involved a little more than just heavy breathing.
Oh my god, you're definitely dying!
It's just a bee sting, my lord, I'm fine.
There's no time to send for a doctor! I'll have to suck the venom out myself!
Anthony, stop that!
No, I'm saving your life!
It's just a bloody bee sting! This is madness! Hey, son. What you doing?
It's fine. I'll marry her.
So, yeah, they were caught in a compromising situation that no one would ever believe was bee-related and had to get married to save Kate's reputation. But what's that I hear you mumble? Dom, you insert self-aggrandizing description here. Surely there's still room for a love triangle. Anthony was courting Edwina after all. Alas, you have made a fool of yourself for a second time, but I still love you. No, there really wasn't. I promise you, there was not a shred of a love triangle in the book. For the simple reason that despite his massive ego regarding the effect he had on women, it would be damn difficult to overstate how little of a shit the original Edwina gave about Viscount Anthony Bridgerton. She was genuinely not even a little upset that him and Kate got together. She was in fact, I kid you not, very happy about the situation. For context, Edwina was fully aware that her family was in the genteel version of financial troubles, and it was basically on her to marry rich to save them. Kate and her mother were really nice about it, but they did end up putting a fair amount of low-key pressure on her, often reminding her that it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich man as a poor one. But young Edwina was a good person with a strong sense of familial duty, so she accepted her fate with good-natured optimism. She was happy that Anthony was the one courting her because if you have to marry for money, it might as well be to a tall drink of water who probably knows how to in the bedroom and might even have the energy afterwards to if, you know, he was still hungry. But that was it. She never loved him. She admitted to her sister she actually had a huge fetish for quiet, bookish nerds. So, when he and Kate got engaged, she not only didn't feel slighted or disappointed, she pointed out that she was now free to marry whoever the fuck she wanted. It was a huge weight of responsibility off her shoulders, and she was the first person to figure out that Kate and Ant-Man were in denial about their feelings for each other, and knew that they could have a happy marriage if they really tried. This might make it sound like the story was resolved less than halfway through the book, but no, the will they won't they absolutely did not end with them getting married, because Kate and Anthony getting together was never the key issue. The book was way more focused on Anthony getting over his childhood trauma. The first chapter of the book lays out the damage his father's death had done to him. Little Anthony had hero-worshipped his dad so much, he was now subconsciously and honestly somewhat consciously convinced that he was also fated to die young. That was the certainty that he lived his entire life around, and led to both his man-whorish lifestyle and its sudden end when he realized he only had so much time left to find a wife and make an heir. It was also his driving motivation for seeking a wife that he wouldn't have a chance of falling in love with, so he wouldn't feel bad about his own demise or leaving her a widow and single mother. Being forced to marry Kate was a bit of a disaster for him because he knew she didn't fit that bill. He could indeed come to love her, and indeed does. It finally dawns on him that he's gone ahead and caught the love bug right after some really good sex, and it distresses him so much he has to immediately run away and avoid his wife for a bit. After he finally figures his shit out, he comes back to talk to her, but discovers she's out for a carriage ride with Edwina and a sexy young nerd that Edwina wants to marry. So he goes to the park to find them, just in time to witness them lose control of the carriage in a terrible crash. Anthony digs Kate out of the wreckage and explains his daddy issues to her, eventually getting over them, and they have an actual marriage from then on. The end. While the season suddenly becoming an in-name only adaptation took me aback at first, in hindsight, I guess it probably shouldn't have, and some of you might have already guessed why when the plot synopsis started sounding strangely familiar. Put plainly, Book 2 in the Bridgerton series has a lot in common with Book 1. Think about it. Simon is a reformed rake. Anthony's a reformed rake. Simon cannot commit to a loving marriage because he has daddy issues. Anthony cannot commit to a loving marriage because he has daddy issues. Simon plays with fire by spending time with a woman he has genuine feelings for until he's caught with his mouth on her boobs and has to marry her for the sake of honor. Anthony, also does exactly those things. Simon loses his shit and leaves his wife for a bit before deciding that he loves her more than he cares about his daddy issues, returns to find her, finds out she's out riding, witnesses her fall from her horse and panics, only to discover that she's okay, and they live happily ever after. In Anthony's case, it's a carriage, and Kate has a broken leg, but otherwise, jinx, motherfuckers! So yeah, I guess it's not hard to guess why Season 2 has a lot less in common with its source material compared to Season 1. The love triangle may be far from the most original of romantic subplots thanks to the titanic rise of YA fiction, but at least it's not a beat-for-beat rehash of the exact same plot points you used in your last book, Julia Quinn. I'm sure it comes as a surprise to no one that Season 2 is just as laden down with original subplots as its predecessor, such as, he's not the new Lord Featherington, he's a very naughty boy. The Featheringtons in the book are not a titled family. They are of the gentry class, but not everyone was a duke or a baron or whatever. So when Mr. Featherington died, which I remind you was 3 years before the start of the book series, his money and property could be left to his wife and daughters without issue. But the show needs its extra drama, so Jack, a distant cousin of the more recently deceased Lord Featherington and the rightful male heir to his estate, returns from overseeing the running of several gem mines in America. This is yet another entirely show original character. Fearing she's being forced out of the last of whatever family wealth remains, Portia Featherington arranges a honeypot situation that forces him into a moderately incestuous engagement with her daughter Prudence, only to discover that his mines were a dud and they're all still broke. She then teams up with Jack to run a Ponzi scheme on her fellow aristocrats using fake jewels to prove the mine's worth. I must confess I have limited sympathy for anyone who fell for this scam because not one of them thought to ask, hey Lord Featherington, it's 1814, how the fuck have you been digging mines in America when Britain and the United States have been at war for the last 2 years? We just burned down their president's house. I don't see how they could possibly be cool with some British knob digging up their rubies right now. In all seriousness, as his mines are supposed to be empty, not non-existent, this seems to be an amusing failing of the show's writers' knowledge of history. While working together doing their crimes, Jack develops the hots for his future mother-in-law, and how could he not? It's Polly Walker, baby! But when Jack eventually gets exposed, Portia pulls out of her nosedive into the dark side and chooses to stay to protect her daughters over running away with him. Anyways, the only times the Featheringtons actually appeared in the book was during a scene where Anthony shuns Cressida for bullying Penelope, and when Portia witnesses Anthony trying to save Kate's life with a medical motorboating, and everyone universally agrees that there is no chance of the news not getting out with her gossipy ass involved. I really thought Penelope was going to be more involved in this storyline, either being the one to expose Jack's schemes through Whistledown or saving the estate from financial ruin by laundering her secret fortune into the family through fake inheritances like she did in the novels, but neither ended up happening and she's surprisingly disconnected from the entire plot. I guess because she was far too busy stressing over the Whistledown thing starting to get complicated. In the novel's timeline, which is absolutely out the window now they've switched the third and fourth books around, but whatever, Penelope's Whistledown-related activities ran smoothly for 11 years before anyone came close to discovering her secret. This was mostly because the majority of it was being handled by the family lawyer and former friend of her late father's, who had discovered Penn's talent for writing and helped her start the paper in the first place. By the time Colin's story rolled around, he'd passed away of old age and she'd taken over a lot more of the business, but at this point he should still have been around to help out. However, we see in the show that Penelope's doing all of the legwork herself, travelling to the seedier parts of London to negotiate with the printers directly while affecting an Irish accent so she can pretend to be her own assistant. She eventually forms an alliance with Madame Delacroix, exchanging positive reviews of her business for help sneaking her articles to the press. Things come to a head when Eloise is falsely accused by Queen Charlotte of being Whistledown, and Penn's forced to write a rather nasty article about her BFF to clear her name at the cost of damaging her reputation and making the Bridgerton situation worse. And it ends with her slipping up and using her Whistledown cadence to be playfully catty with Eloise, finally giving the game away, because Eloise is still doing Eloise stuff. The Season 2 version of the fifth Bridgerton sibling mostly exists to be an unwitting foil for Penelope, as she once again is on a self-appointed quest to find out who Lady Whistledown is, but I decided she deserved her own category because she got distracted from this so many times. My girl has big ADHD inconsistent hyperfocus energy. She is trying to find Whistledown, but wait, now she's joining a socialist movement or something. She's back on Whistledown, and nope, now she's dating a commoner. Boy trouble, yay. Oh, back to Whistledown. Nope, now she's being accused of being Whistledown, and egad, she's figured it out and she is pissed. On an interesting note, I'm assuming that the writers listen to feedback because they have a working class person call her out for her privilege, which was a common complaint about her particular brand of activism in season 1. Yes, your observations about social inequality are entirely accurate, but you should at least acknowledge that you're making them from the chaise lounge that you sit reading on all day because your family won't have to worry about money for the next 6 generations. Funny story, by the way, in my Bridgerton book marathon vlog that's available on Patreon, long before seeing season 2, I complained that it was a bit of a letdown that the books didn't show us what Eloise's reaction to discovering her friend's secret was, as by the time her story starts in book 5, she's clearly over it, as I don't think it's even mentioned. Clearly, myself and the good folks over at Shondaland think alike. Benedict and Teart. Benny B's story once again feels like it's mostly filler, maybe less so than season 1, but he's certainly not impacting the main plot in any meaningful way. He begins the story struggling to find the self-confidence to pursue his love of painting, but is talked into applying to Britain's most prestigious art school. He gets in and gets off with one of the nude models, only to later discover that he was only accepted because Anthony made a large fiscal donation to the school. So, he quits and his confidence in painting is destroyed. Basically, he came full circle and ended up back where he started, which is technically where he needs to be at the start of his story when it finally comes around. A man who needs a woman to come into his life and give him the confidence to follow his art dreams. Though it's a pretty minor part of his book, it's the only unique thing that Quinn assigns to him as a character. Besides that, he is basically identical to Colin. But yeah, none of this makes it any less obvious that the show once again had no idea what to do with Benedict. The only halfway interesting thing he does in the entire season is get high as a kite on mushrooms and make a bit of a tit out of himself. Oh, and if you'll forgive a slightly vindictive comment from me, it is very inaccurate to the original character for him to accept rejection gracefully.
Does that mean I shall see you later on tonight?
I have much work to do, Mr. Bridgerton.
Are you in the modiste still?
Well, apparently not. Have you found a wife yet?
For this to be accurate to the book series, he should have raged out, got incredibly butthurt and resentful, then maybe blackmailed her into spending more time with him. Just a little foreshadowing for his book there. I really didn't care for Book Benedict. I didn't dislike him as much as I disliked Anthony, but he's still a prick. Colin is also here. Giving his elder brother a run for his money regarding who can be the most superfluous, Colin bounces in and out of other people's storylines for the most part. He's kind of on a journey of self-discovery, but he doesn't really make any progress towards this by the end, presumably because they were saving the good stuff for season 3. He interacts with Penelope enough for it to be impossible for us to forget that she's in love with him, and he's oblivious to it. His biggest direct contribution to any of the plots was him being the one to catch on to Bad Featherington's scheme and confronting him, but honestly, I feel like this was something that could have been done by literally any character, and it doesn't seem to tie into his arc in any meaningful way. The scene at the end where Penelope heartbreakingly overhears him saying he wouldn't touch her with a 12-foot barge pole is true to book 4, even if it's in a different time, place, and spoken to different people. On a tangentially related note, it's interesting that the show decided to portray Marina as having achieved a certain amount of contentment regarding her situation. It seems to have been done to accentuate how Colin hadn't managed to put the past behind him in the same way, but if they wanted to be true to the books, Marina should have been deeply depressed at this point in her life. I say interesting and not confusing because having now witnessed how season 2 was adapted, I am less surprised that they appear to be hamstringing future book plot developments, as accuracy to the original text is clearly no longer a primary concern for them. I'm also aware that outward appearances can be very misleading regarding people's internal struggles, but most importantly, the show version of Eloise is such a different character at this point. I would not be surprised if they don't need to kill Marina off because she really isn't going to marry Sir Philip anymore. Wouldn't that be such a baller move? They get to season 5 and suddenly there's no romantic A-plot whatsoever because Eloise is far too busy foiling a plot to assassinate the Queen. Or something, I don't know. A guy can dream. And special mention goes to Will Mondrich, who proves he doesn't need Simon around to continue to be a minor character in the series. I'm still not sure why the gangsters in season 1 didn't feel the need to kill him as well as Archibald when he threw his match, but I'm glad they didn't because his little redemption arc added some nice continuity between the stories.
Final thoughts. So yeah, all in all, a much bigger divide twixt book and show this time around. I'm not going to pretend like I'm super sad about that because, well, you've
probably figured out how I really feel about the books at this point. And I reiterate my admittedly largely unsubstantiated theory that this was because Van Dusen agreed with my opinion that the Viscount Who Loved Me rehashed too many things from the Duke and I to be a viable source material. I would also like to express my amusement again regarding how little the writers of this historical drama seem to know or care about British history, specifically the Empire's relationship to any other country in this time period. I get the sense that they were way more confident of getting another sequel when they made this season, as several plot threads were left unfinished or got their reset button hit right at the end. I suspect that realizing that they had milked the hunt for Whistledown a little too much was a factor in why they bumped up the plot of Book 4. As the showrunners clearly value originality, doing it again while Benedict did his thing with the Cinderella ripoff probably didn't appeal, and they couldn't leave Eloise and Penn hanging for however many years it takes to get to the next installment. Another factor is Book 4 is just a stronger story in general. As I've said a few times now, the first half of Book 3 is just a lazy parody of Cinderella, but with the shoe switched out with a glove because of Quinn's glove removal fetish, and the second half might as well be called the character assassination of Benedict. And yes, I can hear you typing "do season 3, Dom," and I will, I promise, but you might need to wait until season 4 comes around, I'm afraid. My entire life has been consumed by Bridgerton for the past 2 months, and I need to read something else. Anything else. Perhaps watching these other episodes of Lost in Adaptation will help lessen your disappointment, my beautiful watchers. I at least hope you're forgiving enough to throw a like at your boy, and that you'll join me next time.